The voice screamed my failure from the doorway, but the storm outside was about to unleash a far more terrifying welcome committee. The chipped porcelain mug warmed my hands, but it did little to soothe the icy dread pooling in my stomach. Outside, the relentless October rain hammered against the windowpane of the cramped attic room, my self-imposed sanctuary. I took a slow sip of lukewarm tea, the bitterness a welcome anchor to the present, trying to drown out the ringing echo in my ears. "You're useless alone." The voice was Anya's, sharp and laced with that potent, familiar contempt that had been the soundtrack to my life since childhood. She hadn't even bothered to knock this time. The door to the attic, which I'd reinforced with scavenged lumber and 3 deadbolts, had rattled violently under the force of her entry. Anya stood framed in the doorway, illuminated by the dim landing light. Even dripping wet, she managed to project an aura of effortless superiority. Her tailored wool coat, expensive even soaked, seemed to mock the threadbare blanket I was huddled under. Her eyes, the same startling shade of sea glass green as mine, were narrowed with predatory frustration. "Look at you, Silas, hiding among the dust bunnies and the broken dreams. What have you accomplished this week? Another half-finished schematic? Another dead-end algorithm?" She tossed a damp piece of crumpled paper onto the rough wooden floorboards. It was a rejection letter from a grant committee, the 4th this month. They called it unfocused, bordering on delusional. And they weren't wrong. I kept my gaze fixed on the swirling tea leaves, refusing to meet her gaze directly. Direct confrontation was what she wanted. It fueled her. It gave her ammunition. "I told you, Anya," I said, my voice a dry rasp, practiced quiet so it wouldn't carry down to the main house. "The isolation is necessary for the complexity of the variables." She laughed, a short barking sound devoid of humor. "Variables, you sound like one of your ridiculous sci-fi novels. This isn't some laboratory, Silas. This is reality. And in reality, you need capital, you need connections, you need me, you need the family name, which, by the way, I'm currently carrying all by myself while you play hermit up here." Anya had always been the public face, the one who charmed investors, charmed the press, charmed Mother. I was the engine, the hidden mechanism, the part they never saw, because the sight of my intense focus made people nervous. And I'd let her believe that narrative for years. It was easier. "You're useless alone," she screamed again, stomping forward until she stood over me, her shadow engulfing my small corner. "You can't publish without my editing. You can't fund without my presentation. You can't even reliably buy groceries without forgetting your wallet. You are fundamentally dependent, Silas, and I am the one tethering you to this failing enterprise." She paused, breathing heavily, expecting the usual slump of defeat, the muttered apology. She expected me to scramble to defend the integrity of my work, to try and salvage what little dignity I had left in her eyes. But today was different. Today, the storm outside seemed to mirror the electric charge building inside me. Today, the rejection letter felt less like failure and more like permission. I slowly lifted my head, pushing a stray lock of dark, sleep-matted hair from my forehead. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch until Anya started to fidget, her irritation piqued by my sudden calm. Then I did something I hadn't done in years when she was around. I smiled. It wasn't a polite, appeasing smile. It was wide, genuine, and utterly unsettling. It was the smile of a man who knew a secret the rest of the world hadn't even begun to suspect. "You're right, Anya," I murmured, setting the mug down carefully on the makeshift desk fashioned from stacked encyclopedias. I was useless alone. Her sharp features softened infinitesimally, a flicker of victory in her eyes. Finally, you see sense. I shook my head, the smile never leaving my face. But I'm not alone anymore. I reached over to the desk and tapped a barely visible recessed button I'd drilled into the side of an old, non-functional radio casing. There was no sound, no light, just a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration that traveled through the floorboards and into the room. Anya frowned, crossing her arms. What was that? Did you finally blow a fuse trying to power that monstrosity you call a server? No, I said, leaning back slightly, stretching my spine, feeling the tension drain away, replaced by exhilarating anticipation. That was my confirmation signal. Before she could process the words, the single grimy attic window shuddered violently. Not from the wind, but from something impacting it from the outside. It wasn't a branch. It sounded dense, metallic, and horribly fast. A spider web of cracks immediately spread across the pane, and Anya gasped, jumping back a step, her composure finally fracturing. "What in God's name was that?" she whispered, staring wide-eyed at the damaged glass. I looked past her, toward the source of the impact, already reaching under my makeshift desk for the leather-bound journal I usually kept hidden beneath the floorboards. That, I announced clearly, my voice regaining its resonant clarity, was my welcoming committee. The window didn't just crack further. It shattered inward with a deafening explosion of glass shards, and through the sudden dark opening silhouetted against the stormy sky came the unmistakable sound of grappling hooks biting into the shingles of the roof. The sudden, violent intrusion of the storm, and whatever was coming with it, sent a surge of raw adrenaline through me. Anya screamed again, a higher, more panicked sound than before, scrambling backward, tripping over an upturned crate filled with tangled copper wiring. "Silas, what is this? Are you being robbed? We have to call the police!" she shrieked, fumbling wildly for her phone, which was useless up here anyway due to the perpetual signal interference caused by my own jury-rigged equipment. I ignored her completely. The shattered window was now a gateway for the downpour and the wind, whipping loose papers and insulating foam across the small room. But my attention was fixed on the roofline, specifically on the shapes that were now rapidly silhouetting themselves against the bruised twilight sky. They weren't burglars. Burglars didn't wear tactical black webbing or move with that kind of calculated, synchronized efficiency. "They aren't here for the silverware, Anya," I replied calmly, my fingers already flying over the magnetic clasp of the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. "They're here for the project." I pulled out the journal, a simple, hard-bound notebook, unremarkable save for the complex cipher lock embedded in its front cover. As I worked the tumbler, the first figure dropped through the opening. He was large, clad head to toe in dark, non-reflective gear, his face hidden behind a helmet visor that reflected the weak attic light like a dead eye. He moved with brutal economy, landing silently despite his bulk, immediately scanning the room, weapon raised. He saw Anya huddled by the door, then me, focused on the lock. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, assessing the threat level, a hesitation that cost him everything. From the darkness beneath my desk, a sudden high-pitched whine erupted, the sound of an overpressurized solenoid discharging. A thin pressurized stream of supercooled nitrogen, aimed perfectly, struck the intruder's helmet visor. The sudden extreme temperature differential caused the composite material to stress fracture instantly. A spider web of white instantly engulfed the visor, followed by a sharp pop as the internal electronics overloaded. The man staggered back, blinded, roaring in confusion. He swung his weapon wildly. "Get down!" I yelled at Anya, though she was already flattened against the wall. I finished the final click on the cipher lock. The cover sprang open, revealing not pages of writing, but a highly detailed, segmented circuit board encased beneath thick plexiglass. My true work. "They're coordinated, Silas. Who are they?" Anya was hyperventilating, finally grasping the lethal reality of the situation. "Consultants," I spat out, gently tracing a finger over the primary crystalline conduit, the heart of the network. The kind who prefer termination over termination clauses. The first intruder was recovering, blindly trying to wipe his ruined visor. But before he could regain any advantage, the second figure landed inside, moving faster than the first. This one carried no obvious weapon, but moved with the unsettling fluidity of a predator, trained to disable. He bypassed the roaring, blinded man and lunged directly for me. I didn't wait. I slapped the circuit board sharply, activating the primary containment field protocols. A low, resonant hum filled the small space, and the air immediately grew heavy, static prickling the hairs on my arms. The approaching operative froze mid-stride, his movements becoming jerky, as if wading through deep water. The electromagnetic pulse, highly localized, precisely tuned to interfere only with complex biological motor functions, had bought me 3 precious seconds. I used those seconds to pull the journal away from the desk and back toward my chest. I looked at Anya, who was pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face, finally witnessing the terrifying scale of what I had hidden from her. "When I tell you to run, you run straight down the stairs and you don't stop until you hit the front door," I instructed, my voice devoid of emotion. "Tell Mother I'll handle the cleanup." "But the door is locked. They'll kill you," she protested, her voice cracking. "They won't kill me," I corrected, my eyes focused on the third shape now descending rapidly outside the broken frame. "Because I'm not the target. This is." I gestured toward the heavy journal cradled in my arms. The second operative shook off the EMP effect with a grunt, his eyes locked onto the journal. He surged forward again, abandoning caution. He was close enough now that I could see the slight distortion in the air around him. He was wearing some form of personal dampening field, designed to resist precisely what I had just thrown at him. He lunged for the journal. I pivoted, shoving Anya hard toward the attic door. "Go! Now!" She finally obeyed, scrambling out and slamming the weak wooden door shut behind her, bolting it with shaking hands. The operative grabbed my arm with incredible force, his grip crushing bone. I cried out, dropping the journal onto the floor. It slid a few feet away, landing near the edge of the open chasm of the shattered window. The operative released my arm, ignoring my whimpering pain, and spun toward the journal. He was milliseconds away from scooping it up when the entire structure of the house groaned. It wasn't the wind or the rain. It was a vibration originating deep underground, a resonant frequency so powerful it felt like my teeth were shaking loose. The remaining 2 intruders, the blinded one and the new arrival, both paused, looking nervously toward the floor. Their mission parameters had clearly changed. The floorboards directly beneath the operative who held the journal buckled inward with a screech of stressed wood. A new sound rose from the foundations of the house, not a destructive sound but a rhythmic, mechanical thudding, like something impossibly large was rising up from the cellar. The operative bent low, his dampening field flickering slightly under the strain of the unseen subterranean vibration. He snatched the journal, tucking it under his arm. He looked up at me, his hidden face radiating predatory success. "Too late, specialist," a synthesized voice rasped from his helmet. "Assets secured. Exfil initiating." He turned toward the broken window, ready to leap out and use the roof as his escape route. But as he stepped toward the ledge, the rising subterranean rumble peaked, and a thick metallic tendril, slick with dark hydraulic fluid and ending in a complex three-pronged claw, shot up through the ruptured floorboards exactly where he was about to step, pinning him against the wall with impossible strength. The force of the impact sent the operative flying backward, slamming him against the far wall. The specialized journal flew from his grasp, arcing high into the air, illuminated momentarily by a sudden sharp flash of lightning outside. It tumbled end over end, heading directly for the open, empty space where the trapdoor to the outside world had just been, the hole in the roof. I watched the trajectory, my breath caught in my throat. If it fell into the hands of whoever was controlling that immense hidden mechanism below, Anya and I were not just ruined, we were erased. I lunged, ignoring the searing pain in my arm, stretching desperately toward the falling notebook, knowing I couldn't reach it in time. Just as the journal crossed the threshold of the broken window frame, heading for the plunge into the stormy night, something shot past my ear, something thin, black, and fast, a perfectly thrown length of high-tensile cord. It snagged the spine of the journal mid-air, arresting its fall an inch from the edge. The cord snapped taut, pulling the journal swinging back toward the room. But the entity controlling the cord didn't pull it toward me. It yanked it toward the largest source of shadow in the room, the massive clawed tendril that had just impaled the operative to the wall. And from the darkness clinging to the tendril, a voice, entirely different from the synthesized rasp of the intruder, spoke. A voice that was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly close. "I believe that belongs to me, Silas." The voice resonated not just in the air, but deep within the core of the house's structure, vibrating the very dust motes dancing in the lightning flashes. It was a voice I knew, a voice I had spent 2 decades meticulously erasing from my operational memory, a voice that belonged to the one person who understood my work better than I did, the architect of my forced isolation. The black cord attached to the journal tugged insistently, not toward me, but toward the massive, gleaming appendage that was currently pinning the tactical operative against the plaster. This tendril was clearly not part of the house structure. It was chrome, sleek, and impossibly articulate, clearly belonging to whatever controlled the subterranean machinery. I stared, paralyzed, at the journal now swinging tantalizingly close to the metallic claw. My meticulously planned escape route, the network of ghosts I had cultivated in the digital ether, was now facing a physical threat far beyond any corporate mercenary. "Who are you talking to?" Anya's muffled voice called from behind the bolted door, laced with pure terror. "Silas, please move." I couldn't move. I was watching the culmination of years of hidden labor being claimed by an entity I thought I had neutralized. "Anya, stay quiet," I hissed, taking a desperate step toward the suspended journal. "That's not what you think it is." The smooth, cultured voice chuckled, a dry sound like rustling parchment. "Oh, but it is exactly what he thinks it is, Silas. The key to the Nexus. You thought you could run your little off-grid communication matrix while I was busy patching up your sister's reputation. Pathetic." The operative pinned against the wall, still twitching faintly, managed a garbled sound. The tendril shifted, releasing the man just enough for him to slump to the floor, utterly defeated. The operative's helmet visor cracked further, revealing a sliver of pale, panicked human eye beneath the shattered glass. The tendril then turned its attention to the journal, and with surprising delicacy, the three-pronged claw unhooked the cord and carefully tucked the journal into a compartment along its main shaft, a compartment that hadn't been visible a second before. "You taught me everything, Silas," the voice continued, now seemingly emanating directly from the chrome structure beside me. "You taught me how to build the framework. You just forgot to account for your own arrogance when you designed the fail-safes. I took the core schematics when I left. You just kept the beta version." My mind raced. Nexus. That was the code name for the next-generation quantum entanglement array, the one I had painstakingly built in secret, the one Anya was convinced was just feverish coding. It was the only way to ensure truly untraceable, instantaneous global communication. And I had been testing its initial stage, the network Anya thought she was disrupting. "The beta version is useless without the primary encryption key," I managed to grind out, ignoring the throbbing in my arm. "You have the hardware, but you don't have the sequence." "Don't I?" The tendril moved again, this time not toward me, but directly toward the attic door, where Anya was huddled. The metal point of the claw tapped gently, insistently against the wood, right next to the flimsy bolt. Tap, tap, tap. "The encryption key, Silas," the voice repeated, slow and deliberate. "It's not a sequence you type. It's a sequence you feel. It's keyed to the unique biorhythms of the initial architect, and who, Silas, has been tethered to your biosignature since birth, sharing every nervous tick, every surge of adrenaline, every heartbeat pattern." My blood turned to ice. I looked from the impossible machine to the bolted door, realizing the horror of the implications. "You," the voice concluded, dripping with satisfaction. "Your sister, Anya." The tapping stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drumming rain. I knew what came next. He didn't need the journal anymore. He needed Anya's immediate, terrified compliance to unlock the system he'd stolen. "Don't touch her," I roared, shoving myself up, forgetting the pain, driven only by primal protection. I scrambled forward, ready to throw my body against the monstrous claw, but I was too late. Before my fingers even brushed the doorframe, the lock mechanism, a sturdy brass deadbolt, didn't splinter or break. It simply dissolved inward, turning to fine gray ash that drifted down onto the floor. The door swung open with agonizing slowness. Anya stood frozen in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim landing light, staring past me at the metallic horror that towered in the center of the room. "Well, Anya," the smooth voice purred, turning the full attention of the massive machine onto her. "It's time to collaborate. Tell me the frequency." Anya didn't scream this time. She didn't move. Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked from the machine to me, and then something shifted in her expression. Not fear, but a cold, hard comprehension, as if the shock had bypassed terror and landed squarely on understanding. "You should have killed me when you had the chance, Silas," she whispered, her voice steady, utterly changed. And then, instead of recoiling from the claw, Anya took a deliberate step toward it, reaching out her hand, palm open, directly to the compartment holding my stolen journal. The air in the attic thickened almost suffocatingly. The shock of Anya's sudden composure was more jarring than the arrival of the chrome leviathan itself. For 29 years, Anya had been the volatile, demanding public face of our shared existence. Emotional, easily provoked, desperate for external validation. This stillness, this calculated composure, was a mask I had never seen her wear. "Anya, no!" I shouted, lunging again, my good arm desperately reaching across the short distance that separated us. I had to get between them, between my sister and the architect of my ruin, who I now realized was not some distant enemy, but the ghost of my own past. My former mentor, Dr. Alistair Vance, the man who had vanished years ago after our initial research collaboration, went lethally sideways. Vance, or the mechanical shell housing his consciousness, did not flinch at my approach. The massive tendril remained perfectly still, poised like a cobra, waiting for the final command. Anya ignored my desperate cry. Her hand, trembling slightly but holding its trajectory, moved toward the chrome compartment that held the Nexus journal. She didn't touch the metal. She stopped an inch short, mirroring the machine's earlier pause. "The frequency is tied to genuine need, Vance," Anya stated, her voice shockingly steady, carrying the precise clipped articulation that only surfaced when she was negotiating millions or dismantling a competitor. Not just biorhythm, Silas designed it to lock if the core operator felt betrayed. I froze mid-lunge, my breath catching. Betrayed? I had certainly felt that from her 1,000 times, but Vance, he specialized in cold, calculated control. Betrayal was an emotion too messy for his programming. Vance's synthesized voice crackled, a hint of something like surprise underlying the digital monotone. "A fascinating modification, Silas. Did you truly believe your attachment to her was enough to override my direct command?" "He didn't rely on attachment," Anya countered, her eyes now meeting mine across the debris-strewn floor. In that brief connection, I saw a flash of something ancient and shared, a silent confirmation of a conspiracy I hadn't even known existed. He relied on the one thing you never understood about family, the willingness to destroy everything to keep one piece safe. My mind fractured. Anya, defending me? Protecting the network? "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. Anya didn't look away from the machine. "I learned the backup protocols after you shut me out last year, Silas. When you stopped sharing the final integration phases. I knew you were building a kill switch for him, but I needed one too, just in case you decided the family was the obsolete component." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the machine. "Show him, Vance," she commanded. The chrome tendril retracted the compartment slightly, then spat the journal back out across the space between us, aiming it not at me, but toward the far corner of the room near the pile of dusty, discarded equipment. "The final sequence is unlocked, Silas," Vance confirmed, the synthesized voice laced with a peculiar reverence. "Anya provided the trigger vector, the shared memory of your father's final failure. It's now embedded in the primary code. I have full access." Anya stepped back from the machine, her posture relaxed, the terror seemingly burned away, replaced by a chilling sense of victory. "Go get it, Silas. It's all yours. You proved you could build it alone. Now prove you can keep it." I stared from the journal, now resting innocently near a stack of old monitors, to Anya, who was standing there with the confidence of a queen surveying her domain. I realized then that the fight hadn't been between Vance and me. It had been between Vance and Anya, using me as the catalyst. She had been playing a deeper, darker game than I ever could have conceived. She hadn't been screaming in helpless frustration. She had been screaming to provoke me into revealing the weakness in my own security. I scrambled toward the journal, my heart hammering, a sickening realization dawning. If Vance had the key via Anya, then the true power of the Nexus was now accessible to the person who controlled the machine, and that person was currently aligned with my sister. I snatched the journal just as the ground shuddered again, this time not from the machine below, but from above. The entire roof structure groaned in protest. "Wait," I muttered, clutching the journal. "If you have the key, Vance, why haven't you just taken control?" Vance's response was immediate and chilling. "Because the system is designed for two operators, Silas. You provided the engine, the raw communication potential. Anya provided the ethical lock, the human element. If only one operator is present, the system reverts to a dormant, self-defending state, a state that requires immediate physical reboot at the central terminal." "Central terminal?" I echoed, bewildered. Anya smiled, a genuine, triumphant, terrifying smile that mirrored the one I had worn moments earlier. "The one thing you didn't account for, brother," she said, stepping toward the broken window, gesturing outward into the chaos of the storm. "The one place the machine can't follow us." Suddenly, a colossal shape detached itself from the turbulent clouds outside. It wasn't a drone or a conventional aircraft. It was massive, angular, and silent, blotting out the lightning flashes. It looked like an inverted cathedral of dark metal, and it was descending rapidly, hovering just above the house's spire. "You're not going to fight Vance," Anya stated, pulling a small, elegant pistol from the inside pocket of her expensive coat, a weapon I had never known she possessed. "You're going to escape with the hard drive. Vance needs both of us alive and cooperating to maintain the network indefinitely, but he doesn't need the house." She aimed the pistol not at Vance's machinery, but at the exposed main support beam of the attic itself, right where the rafters met the exterior wall. "If you go down the stairs, you're his prisoner," Anya said, her eyes blazing with ruthless purpose. "If you go out that window, you're free. But the machine stays here, intact, so Vance can't move the operation. Choose, Silas. Freedom or annihilation." Before I could respond, she squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was swallowed by the storm, but the effect was immediate. The ancient wooden beam splintered violently, and the entire attic began to tilt inward toward the gaping hole in the roof, sending the heavy server rack sliding across the floor directly toward the precarious edge of the broken window. I gripped the journal tighter, realizing Anya had just engineered a controlled demolition, betting my life on my instinct to survive, while simultaneously ensuring Vance was momentarily stuck in the collapsing structure. I had only one route left, directly into the path of whatever silent behemoth was waiting for us outside. I didn't look back at Anya. I turned, shoved the journal into my jacket, and threw myself through the jagged aperture of the shattered window, plunging headlong into the roaring chaos of the storm, directly toward the shadow of the waiting airship. As I fell, I heard the synthesized voice of Vance bellowing in synthesized rage, overlaid by the triumphant, chilling sound of Anya's laughter echoing from inside the collapsing room. But what stopped my heart entirely was the sound that followed the laughter, the unmistakable rapid thrum of the airship's deployment clamps locking onto my descending body. I hadn't fallen away from Vance. I had fallen toward the only other player in this game, a player Anya had clearly coordinated with. The transition from falling chaos to controlled acceleration was so jarring it stole the air from my lungs. One moment I was plummeting through the icy rain, the next I was secured. The grappling system from the hovering craft, the silent, inverted cathedral, had snagged me with impossible precision. I swung violently, the momentum nearly tearing my shoulder from its socket before I was yanked upward into the dark maw of the ship's underbelly. I landed hard on a grated metal floor, the impact driving the wind from my body for the second time in as many minutes. The air here was stale, recycled, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive machine oil. I immediately tried to scramble away, clutching the Nexus journal like a shield, but I was too slow. Two figures detached themselves from the shadows of the massive hangar bay. They were identical, clad in streamlined, matte black exoskeletons, their movements fluid and devoid of hesitation. They were not soldiers, they were specialized retrieval units. And standing between them, illuminated by the soft cyan lighting of the bay, was the architect of the entire nightmare, Dr. Alistair Vance. But Vance wasn't inside a chrome tendril anymore. He was physically present, younger than I remembered, impeccably dressed in a pristine white lab coat that seemed ridiculously out of place against the industrial backdrop. His eyes, however, were the same, cold, analytical, and completely devoid of empathy. "Welcome aboard, Silas," Vance said, his voice no longer synthesized but perfectly natural, rich with the authority I remembered from the lecture halls years ago. "And thank you for bringing the key." He nodded toward the journal in my grasp. "Anya," I choked out, staggering to my feet despite the pain. "Where is she? What did you do to her?" Vance steepled his fingers, regarding me with the patience of a scientist observing a particularly stubborn insect. "Anya, oh, she's right where she needs to be. In command of the Secondary Operations Center, monitoring the fallout of the asset retrieval. She did excellent work distracting you long enough for me to secure the primary hardware." "She was never on your side," I protested, rage overriding logic. "She hated you." Vance smiled, a genuine condescending smile that wiped away years of my self-doubt. "Hate is just misplaced loyalty, Silas. Anya never hated me. She hated being second chair. She hated being the shadow to your genius. When I approached her 6 months ago, offering her not just a partnership, but the lead role in controlling the Nexus, the true global communication backbone, she found a more useful application for her resentment than simple sabotage. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Anya hadn't been trying to protect me. She had been testing Vance's ability to follow through, ensuring he was capable of seizing the hardware once she triggered the house collapse. She had used the threat of my betrayal to lock Vance into a dependency on her. "The ethical lock," I whispered, remembering Anya's final words. "The system requires 2 operators to function above dormancy. You thought you needed my biosignature, but she gave you the access code based on shared trust." "Precisely," Vance confirmed, taking a slow step closer. "She provided the final validation sequence, the assurance that the engine, you, was neutralized, and the hardware, the journal, was safely transferred. She is my co-pilot, Silas. She steers the ship now. I just provide the power source." My head spun. My sister, my ward, had orchestrated my complete undoing, not for revenge on me, but for elevation alongside the very man who had ruined us both. "You're both insane," I said, backing up toward the edge of the hangar bay, the sheer metal beneath my boots feeling cold and alien. "Insane, perhaps," Vance conceded smoothly, "but powerful. Now, Silas, the Nexus is unstable in this dormant state. We need the journal integrated immediately. Give it to me, and you can join us. Think of the possibilities. We can reshape discourse, control the flow of information globally, create true, unassailable order." He extended his hand, the picture of temptation, The retrieval units shifted slightly, their silent menace palpable. I looked down at the leather-bound book in my hand, the key to instantaneous global contact, the key to dismantling every government, every corporation, every secret organization on Earth. In Vance's hands, it meant absolute totalitarian control. In Anya's hands, it meant absolute sovereignty. I looked up at Vance, the man who had betrayed my father, who had groomed me only to steal my research, and who had just manipulated my sister into becoming his willing tyrant. "You think the system requires 2 operators to function, Vance?" I asked, my voice regaining a frightening level of control. "You're relying on Anya's input because that's what you stole from me, but you missed the last patch." Vance paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. "What patch?" "The final one," I said, taking a deep, steadying breath, the adrenaline finally sharpening into cold, clear focus. "The one I implemented right after I realized you were spying on my private server feeds months ago." I didn't hand him the journal. Instead, I spun around, ignoring the advancing retrieval units, and slammed the journal down onto the grated metal floor. I kicked it hard toward the nearest wall. "The Nexus is designed to link 2 primary nodes instantaneously," I explained, moving laterally, keeping my distance from the 2 black-clad figures. "If the primary key is compromised, the system is designed to achieve true, instantaneous dormancy, not by locking down, but by blinding itself to the compromised node and forcibly initiating a quantum echo transfer to the nearest, secure, high-capacity receiving platform." Vance understood immediately, his pristine face contorted in fury. "You rerouted the emergency protocol? To where, Silas? You have no other station." "I never needed a station," I said, stopping directly beneath a cluster of overhead maintenance conduits. "I needed a sacrifice." I didn't have the physical journal anymore, but I had the sequence imprinted on my mind, and I had the one thing Vance never accounted for, a genuine emergency, a situation so dire that the system recognized only one path to self-preservation. I reached up, ignoring the metallic tang of ozone in the air, and ripped open the access panel of the conduit above my head. Inside wasn't wiring. It was a small, perfectly shielded, silver-cased drive. My true active core, running in perpetual standby mode, feeding minute data packets to the Nexus just to keep it alive enough to respond to catastrophic failure. "The house wasn't the target, Vance," I said, ripping the drive free. It was hot to the touch. "It was the bait. Anya was the distraction. This," I held up the silver core, "is the original seed, and it's about to initiate a complete system purge." Vance let out a guttural roar. "Stop him! Retrieve the core!" The 2 retrieval units surged toward me, but as their exoskeletons crossed the invisible line where my magnetic field signature, now boosted by the core drive, began to overlap with the Nexus's latent signal, they seized up. The high-powered dampeners in their suits overloaded instantly. They collapsed in twin heaps of sparking metal and plasticized armor. Vance lunged across the hangar floor, abandoning all pretense of control, reaching for the core drive. "You can't purge it all, Silas! It's too large!" he shrieked. "No," I agreed, lifting the drive high above my head. "But I can make sure no one has it." With a final surge of strength, I hurled the silver core drive not toward the floor, but directly upward toward the ceiling of the hangar bay, where the airship's main reactor core was visibly humming with tremendous power. The drive struck the reactor shielding with a small, pathetic tink. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. Vance stopped, panting, his eyes fixed on the tiny drive, realizing I hadn't activated a purge. I had initiated a hostile takeover of the power source. Then, the entire cavernous hangar bay filled with an overwhelming, blinding white light. The hum of the reactor pitched upward into an unbearable, soul-shattering whine. Every system on the ship, the lights, the gravity plating, the life support, vanished in an instant. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was Vance, frozen mid-reach, his face illuminated by the catastrophic feedback surge of his own power source, his eyes wide with a sudden, final understanding of total failure. And in the absolute deafening silence that followed, a small cracked speaker on the hangar wall sputtered to life, carrying a single digitized whisper, distant but clear. "You're still useless alone, Silas." It was Anya, safe, somewhere else, having ensured that even if I survived, neither Vance nor she would possess the weapon. The Nexus was gone. All of us were ruined, but finally, terrifyingly, I was free.